Hello, dear viewers. Here is a new video that I will please you on my channel, Manhwa Compilation. I hope you like my story and how I told it to you. We start in the prison. Our protagonist, Peter, was talking to his father, who was in prison. His name was Jack. Peter tells his father that he was already of legal age and had every right to know the truth. Our protagonist wanted to clear his father's name for what happened 8 years ago. It turns out that in the past, the city experienced a huge wave of monsters, and there were many victims. That was the biggest tragedy in all of China. Peter's father was the only one who managed to escape alive. The media reported that, according to the investigations, Jacques didn't survive because he didn't fight to withstand that event. He simply fled the scene. This was considered an act of betrayal and cowardice towards China. However, an old hero's story was that his sentence would be a 10-year trial to determine whether he would be executed or remain in prison. For a young child like the protagonist, being the son of a traitor brought only problems and misfortunes. School, work, and even donating blood were impossible if you're the child of a national criminal. The protagonist was only here because he knew his father better than anyone. Peter wanted to save him from this injustice. Jack told Peter that there wasn't much to talk about. His trial was already decided, just like his fate. Jack wanted Peter to leave the city, change his identity, his name, and start a new life. He only wanted a good future for his son. Even so, Peter didn't accept it, and didn't intend to let his father rot in that prison. Leaving the call room, a guard calls the protagonist and tells him that from now on, the visiting fee has tripled. Therefore, it would cost over $1,000 to come see his father. This was exactly what the prison's higher-ups decided. In fact, they were being kind by allowing visits to a traitor. Peter thinks that people forget very quickly everything his father did for the country. Later on, Peter thinks that $450 was already his limit. 3 times more expensive was impossible for him to afford to visit Jack. The protagonist was a member of the Starfall Warriors Reserve. In short, he earned the minimum wage. In fact, a regular person has a minimum of 10 points in each of their skills. In this case, the protagonist's skill points weren't very high. Peter thinks that his father was hiding things from him, but now it would be much harder to visit him with the elevated price. So, the protagonist goes directly to a person named Chimey. He tells the protagonist that there was a rank E mission available, something easy for a good warrior, but too difficult for the protagonist. Jaime says the protagonist had already been on rank F missions, and for him, it was a miracle that the protagonist was still alive. Peter says he had no other option, so Jaime, not very pleased, tells the protagonist about a position in a rank E mission. Although the pay was good, the protagonist didn't have the strength to fight, at least not against a monster of that category. Peter looks at the guide and realizes they were paying $3,000. Therefore, he was very happy with Jaime. By the way, I didn't tell you before, but Jaime was an old friend of the protagonist's father. In recent years, he was the one who took care of Peter. So, he was like an uncle to the protagonist. Now we'll have to explain the power levels in this story. As far as I know the work, I suppose the ranks are more advanced. But what I'll explain will be sufficient for you to understand the types of warriors. They are all Starfall warriors. The weakest, like the protagonist, are part of the Starfall Reserve. Then they go from lower to higher. Tarp warriors, Star warriors, Starfall warriors, Warlord, and finally, Advanced Warlord. There are also ranks for weapons, missions, and artifacts. In fact, monsters have the same rank as warriors in a one-on-one relationship, in a basic way, without mutations or weapons, and without counting the experience of monsters or warriors. The ranks are more or less like this. A novice warrior is at the level of a rank F monster, an intermediate warrior is at the level of a rank E monster, and an advanced warrior is at the level of a rank D monster. Continuing on, the protagonist prepares. He knows that for a rank E mission, intermediate or experienced novice warriors attend. Those guys are too strong for the protagonist. This was the group that would accompany him. She is the spouse. I'll leave her original name because it's easy to remember. Ginyuj was the leader of this squad, and she was an intermediate-level Starfall warrior. The protagonist notices the armor and her sword. Only high-caliber warriors use that type of weaponry. Furthermore, she explains that after eliminating hundreds of monsters, You can obtain the monster cores, and Starfall equipment is built based on these cores. In fact, these weapons can even enhance the user's stats. That's one of the variables. For instance, an intermediate warrior's stats are at least 40 points in all their abilities. By the way, the 4 attributes are mind, physique, strength, and agility. Additionally, they can acquire additional skills like special moves, so to speak. Ginyug was the same age as the protagonist, and Peter thinks that Starfall warriors under 20 years old are called prodigies. The protagonist stops analyzing Ginyug and introduces himself, but this individual blocks his way. Now, he was being hurt, and Ginyug's uncle, called C, tells him to stop intimidating such a weak boy. It's just embarrassing. Peter already senses the man's bad intentions. Although they could approve the protagonist, he responds greatly, demonstrating his impressive reflexes, and everyone thinks he's indeed fit for this mission. However, it truly took a toll on the protagonist. It took him some effort to stop this attack launched by the novice warrior. The difference in strength is incredible. Ginyug says that Jaime was right about him. Now, Ginyug's uncle, who I'll call Judas, tells Peter that it wasn't in the rules to bring someone so weak on a rank E mission. Thus, he needed to sign this contract. The protagonist finds good warriors and good equipment, even a good sum of money for the mission. Just for today, Peter would let himself be swayed by the money that he needed anyway. Everyone checks their equipment, and the mission begins. Now, the topic of dungeons in this world is explained. In this story, dungeons aren't in other dimensions, not even a portal is needed. The monsters themselves, when they started attacking while they didn't defeat humanity, managed to seize some scattered places all over the earth. This is what remained of the City Center X, now turned into a rank E dungeon. Just so, the protagonist patrolled this place, encountering a wave of monsters called Lagartos, rank E monsters. The protagonist aims his weapon to prepare his move. He shoots directly into the eye. However, the arrow simply bounces as if nothing happened, immediately alerting all monsters to Peter's presence. The protagonist starts running logically. However, the monster's speed was greater than the contract data indicated. While Peter runs, he thinks about how the Lagartos have incredibly tough scales covering their whole bodies, sharp teeth that could bite through metal, webbed claws, and absorption capabilities. If Peter didn't know about these monsters, he wouldn't stand a chance in a chase. So, he recalls that every monster in the world has a weak point. The protagonist manages to shield himself, surprises the monster, and attacks using his weapon. He shoots arrows at the lizard's tongue, which really aren't special, so no matter how much they pierce, they simply can't harm these monsters with regular weapons. You need weapons that have the power of a monster core, or weapons made from a monster. The Lagarto attacks, and thanks to his agility, Peter manages to dodge the blows. Then he decides to continue the plan and lead the monsters into a trap. Precisely, Peter's whole team was waiting for him. This was the plan, a simple ambush. Judas yells at everyone to get ready for the ambush, and the battle begins. For Ginyug, it's quite easy. Her strength and rank are sufficient to eliminate monsters of this level. The fight goes smoothly. Peter is happy to see the group is strong, and his job was easy. So in a few seconds, Ginyug dispatches the Lagartos. She's the strongest of them all. However, in an instant, a monster tries to attack with its last bit of strength. It's headed straight for the protagonist, and this guy, who's Judas's son, when he sees the monster attacking him, he's quite cowardly. He shoves Peter so that the monster would bite him instead. But the protagonist uses his agility and shoots the beast. Then, Ginyug shows up and delivers the final blow. Suddenly, lying on the ground, the protagonist sees a system in his mind that would soon be activated. To Peter, it seems like a hallucination, but the system states that activation is due to Peter eliminating a rank E monster. Returning to reality, since this cowardly guy is Ginyug's uncle's son, there are no consequences for what he did against the protagonist. Now, all that's left is to clean up this mess. Night is approaching. Ginyug is considerate towards the protagonist, providing him with rations of food. Furthermore, she praises him by saying that he was an exceptional explorer, and the protagonist likes the term Judito. That's what we're going to call this guy, she tells the protagonist. She mentions that he was good cannon fodder, but Peter was not foolish and understood his exact intentions. At midnight, the Pelota was monitoring the area in case monsters arrived, as that was his job. He told her that her help was not needed, but the hunter was simply following what the contract stated. Both of them were supposed to watch, and she wouldn't leave him alone, as that was what the contract dictated. Up to this point, the protagonist mentions that he and his group were from City J. That's why he asks Jim Yue why she came from so far away. She says this is just a stupid test from her family, and the protagonist would tell her why he was here. However, out of nowhere, the floor starts to crumble, and both of them fall into the abyss. They end up falling onto the tracks of an underground train. Using glasses that allowed him to see structures, Peter says it's a geological failure, and they were extremely unlucky. Jinjiu asks the pilota if he can see or knows where the exit is. Peter knew where all the exits were. He had researched well before the expedition. So they start moving. If the path was clear, they wouldn't take long. Peter realizes that Jinjiu could see things he couldn't. He mentions that the sight of an intermediate warrior can clearly see even in the dark. The girl warns him that there were monsters of rank E ahead. Peter wonders why he couldn't hear them, and Jinjiu explains that neither of them could hear. It was the sword that warned her. This was the skill of the sword's sense, one of the thousands of skills that Starfire warriors could learn. But this one was special. They prepare for battle. There were plenty of monsters approaching quickly, even more than those above. So, the hunter gets serious and doesn't intend to lose. The protagonist also won't stand still, but the girl yells at him that with his strength he would die for nothing. He should stay behind her while she alone uses all her strength to defeat the Pehelagartos. The protagonist analyzes her strength and thinks that Yin Yue is close to being an advanced-level warrior. She was easily dispatching these creatures. A piece of the monster's head is about to fall on Peter, unfortunately injuring him. He steps back and recalls that he wasn't even at the level of a novice warrior on a rank E mission. It's a miracle he's still alive. Then the light returns, and a system in his head tells him that by eliminating the rank E monster, the system will soon be ready to function properly. In this situation, Peter is more concerned about the monsters than his hallucinations. But Jinjiu resolves the problem. Her sword takes care of all the beasts. Now they need to move towards the exit. The protagonist can't help but be amazed by her strength. They're close, but when they arrive, it's blocked. Peter deduces that the exit was intentionally blocked from the outside. Jinjiu starts to suspect the protagonist. Peter shouts at Jinjiu, ridiculing the idea that she's only with him because he's basically just cannon fodder. Yin Yue analyzes the protagonist's reaction, puts away her weapon, and tells Peter she was just testing him. All these accidents were too convenient. She turns around and tells him that they wanted her eliminated, and apologizes to Peter for dragging him into all this trouble. Peter thinks that within families, internal wars often occur. The strong survive, and the weak die. To rise within a family, you have to complete missions and defeat your own relatives. Jinjiu asks the protagonist if there are other exits or less obvious ones. Using his spatial memory, the protagonist realizes something. They just passed a fence at the train station. It's blocked, but there are gaps where they both can enter. So they head towards it. But Jinjiu is grateful to have been locked up with someone like Peter. Along the way, they stop. But remember that the protagonist is just a step away from being a regular human, while Jinjiu's strength is comparable to that of the Guardians of the Galaxy. The girl asks the pilota why he, not even a warrior, sought out such dangerous situations. Peter doesn't respond, but he touches the necklace around his neck and remembers many things. The protagonist recalls his mother, and also that his father wanted to eradicate the monsters on this planet. After a while, still being a child, Peter lost his mother, who they said died while trying to save people from a monster outbreak. The protagonist knew his father would do the same, and that it was the last thing his mother did. Right until the end, there was someone responsible for all this, someone named Ginyuj, to whom Peter wouldn't respond. So he apologizes for asking questions that didn't matter to her. Peter gets up a little more relaxed, and they continue. Finally, the kids were outside, but in an instant they're attacked by a massive rain of poisoned arrows coming towards them. The House Oda jumps over the protagonist, preventing him from getting hurt. Peter gets up and sees that a poisoned arrow hit Ginyug. Despite that, the kids manage to hide under a rock, so Peter takes out the arrow and tends to the girl. The protagonist tells her that he has the antidote, so it's not a big problem. Ginyuj manages to realize who was behind her betrayal. Of course, it's her uncle, and practically the whole team accompanying them. Peter understands that all this monster hunting was just a trap for the girl. Ginyuj yells at her uncle that her father saved her and got her a wife. She expected it from everyone except him. Judas replies that for money, Everyone is capable of betraying anyone. Then, he activates a switch that blows up the entire hill, and the kids have no choice but to return to the cave. Moreover, there were many more monsters approaching. Peter and Ginyuj return as they can. This place is not very safe. And besides, the poison is beginning to affect the lizards. Ginyuj tells the protagonist that this is not a coincidence. They accepted him for the job not because of his skills, but because he's his father's son. In short, when the traitors die, they will blame Peter. The protagonist thinks he can't allow that. If she dies, then he would be guilty, and his father would pay for it. Now, faster than ever, they must get out of here alive, both of them. A lizard attacks, but the house Oda holds it back. She says she can still fight, so the protagonist uses all his knowledge to quickly find another exit. He had it close. There was a place to escape, so they start running. The girl fights, and the protagonist guides her. Peter still feels useless. Despite her being injured, she remains the strength of the team. They arrive quickly. There's a draft noticeable, but it won't be so simple. A massive horde of Pelagartos is approaching. Ginyuj tells the protagonist she'll take care of the monsters while Peter secures the exit so these creatures won't follow them. So, he starts doing his part, and the protagonist runs towards the exit. In just a few minutes, he manages to fashion a trap in the form of a net. Then, Ginyuj runs towards the trap and goes under it, causing all the monsters to get caught. Being too many, they easily fall, causing the cave to collapse. Outside, finally, the kids had managed to escape without monsters pursuing them. While she thanks the protagonist, who by the way lost count of how many times he's been thanked, her sword alerts her to danger. Many, or even more, monsters are invading the surface. Worse yet, the house is losing consciousness due to the poison it has. She tells the protagonist to run from this place. Peter says that running makes no sense. He takes the sword and the huntress. While thinking he's never really faced a range monster on his own, even if he dies here, he'd take a Pelagarto with him to the grave. One jumps on him, and despite Peter beheading it, the monster's head shoots its tongue and pierces his heart. Peter thinks and apologizes to his father for not being able to clear his name. But just before dying, the system returns. It activates because the protagonist eliminated 3 rank E monsters. The new god of war is about to be born. The protagonist's body regenerates as an emergency protocol. Furthermore, Peter's statistics max out, causing him to wake up and not really understand what happened. He doesn't even have a scratch where he was impaled. But he realizes that all the Pelagartos are after the huntress. So he gets up, and all the creatures, of course, attack him immediately. However, the protagonist easily dodges them. They are very surprised. Now he can even sense a great power emanating from Ginyuj's sword. The weight is perfect. Peter thinks he can use it to the fullest without much difficulty. The creatures don't stay still and continue attacking. The protagonist jumps over them, grabs them by their tongues using his regular weapon, and hurls them back with their own force, giving them the final blow. The protagonist says that he's now close to the best level of a novice warrior. Adding the sword to that, it won't be very difficult to fight against all the Pelagartos. In fact, with so many monsters in this place, Peter is eager to see what he's capable of. The protagonist charges head-on against the beasts. Despite being bitten, with his new physical level, the fight was very different. Peter truly ceased to be weak. The boy who used to hide could now create or carve his own path among the monsters. In a very short time, Peter eliminated a large number of monsters. The system displays to the protagonist all the points he gained for eliminating these creatures. And though this was incredible, he had to first figure out what to do with Cazadora. The protagonist decided to return to the cave. Due to the explosion, many Pelagartos were now on the surface, so it was safer here. The priority was to counter Ginyuj's poison. Now Peter explains to us that there was lizard bait in Ginyuj's equipment, which spilled. This was also the reason they were found by the Pelagartos, so he had to block that scent so they wouldn't find her. However, the only thing he had was this smelly fox-scented liquid, something he constantly used because monsters in general despised this foul odor. Finally, Ginyuge was bandaged and healing. The protagonist says she was safe here, but there could be more monsters above, or worse, an ambush by Judas. So he had to think carefully about how to get out of here. But before that, he had to understand the war god's system. The protagonist checks his status, statistics, and points, but I'll only tell you what's relevant. The protagonist learns how to distribute points to his statistics, and for each monster he eliminates, Peter receives a certain amount of points. So, after increasing his strength, Peter talks to his sword and is surprised because he truly feels more powerful. He then allocates the remaining points and wants to test himself in combat. He sets a trap for a monster and quickly ambushes and eliminates it with some ease. Peter was fascinated by his strength and speed. The system states that he can eliminate a rank E monster and currently receives 3 points for each lizard he eliminates. So, the protagonist calculates, and he can't believe that by eliminating only 50, he could get 150 points. Distributing those points would give him the strength to become an advanced warrior, so his strength could quickly increase by up to 50%. After the warrior level comes the warlord level. Peter thinks that if he could reach that level, nothing would stop him from clearing his father's name later on. The protagonist walks along the train tracks. He explains that these creatures' hides sold quite well, so with all this, he could at least earn around $5,000. However, he couldn't take everything. It was more complicated than it seemed. Peter scraped his sword against the wall to alert the monsters. The Pehelagartos were here within seconds, but despite several attempting to attack him, with his speed and strength, he crushed them. The protagonist had already taken down almost 20 Pehelagartos and was now an intermediate warrior. Precisely because of this, by eliminating these monsters, he now only gained skill points for each one. Before, he only gained 3 points because these monsters were physically above his level, but now they weren't. Maybe he needed more to become an advanced warrior, but Peter knew that with this strength, he was more than capable of saving himself and Ajin Yue. The protagonist continued walking and encountered something extraordinary, a mutated monster. This was the result of the fusion between 2 Pehelagartos. All its statistics increased. They were extremely powerful, and as far as I recall, they could even do that while fused. In fact, this little friend was a cannibal and devoured anything nearby to survive locked up here. The protagonist says that this one had the power equivalent to an advanced warrior. It would be a big problem. So for now, he needed to retreat. Peter left with Yin Yue. She had almost lost the scent that attracted the Pehelagartos. However, Peter needed her help to defeat this giant monster. As long as they couldn't pass by where the mutant was, they couldn't escape from this place. Finding another exit was more likely to lead them to encounter the traitors. Yin Yue woke up at an unfortunate moment, and after listening to the protagonist, she thought Peter was good at hiding his strength. But Peter played along, as he couldn't tell her about the war god system. The protagonist mentioned that he was Jack's son. She immediately knew who he meant. Moreover, she thought it made sense for him to hide his strength. With his father's reputation, he could have too many enemies. By being weak, he could remain unnoticed. The girl apologized to the protagonist again for dragging him into all this trouble. Peter asked her for help with the mutant, as they needed to get out of there quickly to prove his innocence. So the girl decided to go see where Yin Yue was resting. She said that this was a very serious problem. This thing was above a normal rank monster. It was the massive fusion of a Pehelagarto and a crocodile. She explained about it, saying that, in short, it was practically invulnerable. You couldn't hurt it easily, and each head had a specific function in combat. Yin Yue tells the protagonist that the only way to defeat the monster is with the Star Sword. Only by unleashing its full power can the sword penetrate the side. Later, Yin Yue demonstrates her power to the protagonist by stacking several lizard skins on top of each other and using her sword mastery, invoking the sword's full power. In this way, Yin Yue almost effortlessly cuts through the skins. I don't know if I've already mentioned it, but advanced weapons usually have monster cores. Yin Yue explains to the protagonist how to unleash the full power of the sword's resonance. However, he must be quick. She explains that every time the core of the weapon resonates, it suffers damage and wears out. Furthermore, she was injured. Therefore, she couldn't fight using the sword's maximum power. Peter had to learn this within a 3-day period, practicing with the sword and continuously eliminating monsters. He never gave up. Yin Yue knew that achieving this in 3 days was impossible. Someone with talent would do it through constant practice. Even in their lifetime, most can't achieve resonance by eliminating dragons, but Yin Yue had faith in Peter because before the age of 19, he was already an intermediate-level warrior. To her, he was an incomparable genius. He had a chance to achieve it. The protagonist finishes eliminating this group of monsters. Peter says that despite all the monsters he eliminated, he couldn't even feel the skill, that is, the resonance that the hunter mentioned. Ginyuj thought it would be a disaster if she didn't return within 3 days. There was a ceremony, and if she wasn't there, Judas would take control of her family. Worse yet, the protagonist's father would end up being beheaded because his son killed the prodigy of an important family. Ginyue regrets it, but Peter was the only one who had a chance to save them both. As luck smiled upon Peter, the system gave him a terrifying advantage. He could learn skills in exchange for some unallocated skill points, that is, points he gained from killing creatures but hadn't yet distributed among his statistics. Also, being an intermediate warrior was a requirement to learn resonance with this sword. The protagonist accepts the points for ability exchange with the sword. Instantly, his body refines with the sword, and now he has a natural sharpness. Enjoy was terrified. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was amazing, but also discouraging. He had put too much energy into the resonance, hence he collapsed. Sometime later, we see the mutated creature resting. In a swift movement, the protagonist begins the hunt. The mutated creature shoots sound waves and its dangerous tongue. However, the protagonist's agility was not bad at all. Peter thinks that cutting off a head would instantly reduce the monster's power by half. But the mutated creature was very fast and manages to deliver a good blow to the protagonist. Peter knows he wasn't careful. He never imagined the mutated creature's tail would be so swift. Although it hurt, and he was severely injured, he didn't intend to give up. The monster continues attacking, but Peter manages to dodge. It keeps attacking with its tongue, and the protagonist dodges, but it also attacks. Even though Peter dodges, he doesn't manage to avoid the mutated creature's tongue. Therefore, he ends up more injured and has no choice but to hide. The protagonist was hurt and thought about how terrifyingly monsters can improve by becoming mutants. He truly believed that he would win due to his improvements, but even with all this, things were going badly. Jinjoel prevents Peter from retreating. He was hurt, and if Jinjoel caught him, he would have no chance of escaping. The protagonist does the best he knows how. He analyzes all the characteristics of the monster, its strengths and weaknesses. Peter thinks that to defeat it, he must master combat skills of rank E. But even if he didn't have them, he couldn't retreat. Time was running out. If he gave up, he would be blamed for Ginyuga's supposed death, and his father would pay with his life. So he has a childhood memory where he remembers his mother's death and how her body was never found. So even his mother might still be alive. Peter couldn't die here. The mutated creature keeps attacking. The protagonist manages to dodge the powerful monster's attacks. Peter thinks that he will leave this place and prevent his father's name from being tarnished, even if it's the last thing he does. The system recognizes that Peter is fighting between life and death, so it activates an ability called Perception. The ability was at the novice level, naturally, and it allows him to detect monsters within a range of 10 meters. The protagonist was aware of everything happening exactly, even behind his back. So he activates the resonance and shatters the mutated creature. Jinjoa couldn't believe it, and the protagonist tells him they can finally move forward. Additionally, the system tells the protagonist what can eliminate this monster. He had obtained 3 points as a reward. Even the monster's core came off, and now the protagonist could take this core. The exit was straight to the surface. Peter rushed to load the Dota house at full speed. On the way, we can see some chemistry between these two. However, on the way, they are discovered and receive a rain of arrows, but Peter quickly dodges them. It was Judas's son, saying that this time he thought of bringing more people to take care of his cousin. The protagonist remembers this guy and wanted to take care of him. Judito says that his father had warned him, and despite everything, they still had a chance to escape, so he shouldn't give them room to breathe. Ginyue tells him that once she returns home, everyone will be brought to justice, so Huagito orders them to catch them and, if necessary, eliminate them. But the protagonist, with the dagger and his skills, finds it very easy to take care of all these subjects. So he first ensures Ginyue's safety, and upon seeing that some of his men were eliminated, Udito couldn't believe what he saw. How was it possible that someone who wasn't even a novice warrior defeated them so easily? He believed it was thanks to the star swords, so they just had to shoot. But thanks to the protagonist's perception, calculating where the arrows or bullets were and destroying them in an instant was no longer a problem. With enormous speed, The protagonist takes care of everyone. Now, only the rat with the bigger mouth remained. He didn't know what to do, so he started to run, but the protagonist was much faster and began to hurt him to make him suffer. Although Jaguido picked up an arrow from the ground and wasn't planning to give up, the protagonist eliminated him once and for all. Later, the kids continued to advance. The rescue team had arrived. Ginyue's family butler was here to escort her. She tells the protagonist that as soon as she arrives home, everything will be ready to deal with the traitors in her family. While the butler looked at the fact that the protagonist had Ginyue's weapon with disdain, they say their goodbyes, and she shouts to the protagonist that he should come see her since she had already given him her address. However, the butler tells the hunter that the son of a traitor was not worthy of her. Later, Judas arrived at this place, seeing how they eliminated his little aberration, and swears that no matter what, the day the protagonist pays for all of this, night will come and a helicopter will land on the prison where they had the protagonist's father. For now, we'll call him Marine and Sandra. They came here only for Jack. The protagonist was also here. He wanted to tell his dad everything and hoped he would tell him the truth. But he noticed something in the air, a floating prison. In fact, it's not just any prison. This is the most dangerous one in China, where they have the most wicked guys. No one gets out of there alive. The protagonist couldn't believe it, but he knew that this enormous vision was only here to take his father away. Right on the terrace, they were already taking Jack to the floating prison. However, Peter somehow managed to make it here. The guards tried to stop him, but Peter shrugged them off. He was knocking them down, but he really didn't know what he was trying to do. He was attacked by Sandra, but thanks to his perception, he managed to block her blow. The protagonist told her he just wanted to say goodbye to his father, but she tried to attack him. The protagonist managed to block her attacks, but he knew that this girl was strong, so all he could do was block her attacks. Marin told Jack that his son knew how to move very well. He really knew how to hide his strength, but Jack also had no idea what was going on. The protagonist kept explaining and shouted to Sandra that if she didn't want to get hurt, it would be best for her to step back. So, he activated his resonance and had a collision that generated a huge explosion. Neither the protagonist nor Sandra intended to step back, but to Peter's bad luck, the core of his weapon ended up being destroyed. Marin admired the protagonist's strength and determination, so he gave him a minute to talk to Jack. Jack congratulated Peter on how strong he had become, but the protagonist started to help, as he told Marin that he never betrayed China. The evidence was locked in a prohibited area of a military base in a distant city. If he wanted answers, he could go there to find them. Finally, the helicopter in the prison took off. The protagonist stayed on the terrace watching as they took his father away. The next day, the protagonist was resting, and in addition to waking up in a very bad mood, now he had to leave. Peter didn't really remember why he woke up, but he remembered that Jaime had told him he could take things to start his journey to City H, where his father's evidence was. So Peter got ready and left immediately for there. When he arrived, Jaime analyzed him and was surprised that the boy had become so strong. He was simply hiding his strength, Jaime thought. Anyway, he didn't care. Everyone had things to hide. Everything the protagonist needed to reach the city was in this backpack. His journey was relatively simple. Furthermore, he gives him the Novice Warrior certificate to take the exam and become an intermediate officially. He had to let at least 3 months pass. Jaime tells the protagonist that City H is heavily guarded by the army. Entering and leaving is not easy. Peter thanks him for taking care of him all these years, and his uncle says he did everything because the commander saved him. So the protagonist leaves, promising Jaime that he would come back to visit him, and Jaime only hoped that things would go well for the protagonist and that he would never return home. Peter says he already had the tickets, so for now, he would go to the mall to fix the scratch he had and to put the mutated monster's core in it on the way. He receives a call from a friend, and they agree to meet with the friend's girlfriend included to chat and talk for a while. Finally, the protagonist arrives. Immediately, he realizes that he can see the real level of people. He could see the strength of others thanks to the system. In fact, he concludes that he could only see the rank of equals or weaker individuals than him, because Peter couldn't see Sandra's power. In this world, the one who is strong also has the ease of finding a partner. When he enters the mall, he observes that there were many people here. Peter reviews the prices of the mall and exchanges everything he collected from the monsters, really lamenting that he left many things behind to exchange. If he had collected everything, he would be rich. Peter notices a worker. He knew that girl. She was the girlfriend of the protagonist's friend. But she was busy, and he also had things to do. Right then, a worker approaches Peter to take him to a blacksmith. But the girl tells the protagonist that only an advanced rank blacksmith could forge this type of monster cores. And currently, they didn't have a smith of that caliber. So, he decides to leave. But just then, a girl appears. The manager rushes towards Peter to tell him that now there was indeed a warrior capable of forging the sword. Her name is Nyam. Though young, she already had the rank to forge the weapon the protagonist wanted. In fact, at the beginning, she already thinks that the protagonist is not the owner of the core, because when Peter gives it to her, she understands that it is a very healthy, strong, and powerful core. So she doesn't believe that someone as young as Peter could defeat this monster. The protagonist tells her that he is the owner, though she doesn't believe him. She tells him to follow her, but she won't be responsible if something happens to Peter. Now they are in the forge area, and here we see Nyam working on the new body of the sword for this core. Once finished and forged, the most important step follows. Nyam embeds the core into the sword to fuse it and unleashes a great power. Now the protagonist had to suppress the monster's soul to make the sword ready. The protagonist does it in a very simple way, just remembering the moment when he defeated it. Now the sword was ready to be used. But he couldn't believe it anymore, because only the one who eliminates the beast can suppress it without it being contained. The beast only cowers in front of the individual who eliminated it, no matter how strong the one in front of it is. The monster always tries to deny it, but against the one who truly eliminated it, it simply flees in fear. So, she apologizes to Peter for not having believed him, although the protagonist didn't believe her either. So there was no reason to apologize. Now Peter feels the power of this new weapon. A rank E sword. Just by holding it, Peter feels even stronger. Nyam tells the protagonist that if he wanted her to always be his blacksmith, then he should call her Big Sister. I have no idea why the protagonist agrees, although hurt. But in return, she gives him a VIP card for discounts and to travel around the mall without any problems. The protagonist feels that it's perfect. The mall has an exclusive weapons testing area, and he wanted to know what this new weapon was capable of. A while passes, and now we are introduced to this trainer, an advanced warrior we'll call Tank. He receives a notification that the protagonist was about to fight and that he's a VIP, so he himself had to help the protagonist test his weapon. The protagonist was waiting, and Tank arrives immediately. So they introduce themselves, and he tells the protagonist that he's here to help him test his weapon. The protagonist stands in front of Tank. He thinks his power is equal to or greater than Sandra's. However, Peter is confident because he has the new super weapon he obtained. He wants to test what it's capable of. The fight begins, and the protagonist attacks with incredible speed. Tank thinks he's very fast for being so young, but he quickly pulls out his weapon, a giant axe that he doesn't even tell us its range, with which he defends himself. The protagonist is impressed by his tremendous strength, but uses his perception to find flaws in Tank's defense. However, the big guy switches to attack mode in an instant. Now, the protagonist steps back from a single blow. Peter thinks that if it weren't for the new sword, he might not have been able to get up from that tremendous blow. Tank tells him he's too naive. If he really wanted to defeat him, he had to go all out. The protagonist prepares his move because he already planned to see his limits right now. The sword clashes head-on with great power. Although Tank gets hurt, he expels his power to push the protagonist back. In fact, that had been a combat skill, and Tank is annoyed with himself since he could have seriously injured Peter. The battle ends immediately. Tank apologizes to the protagonist. The protagonist tells him it's okay because he also got carried away. Tank has to leave, and before he goes, he tells the protagonist he needs to practice really hard to use the sword well. Actually, the protagonist completely masters it, so he has a lot of room for improvement. Even so, Tank leaves. Naya tells the protagonist that he needs to give the sword a name to register it in the mall. The protagonist names it Bone Crusher. Later, Peter was at the mall's restaurant, waiting for his friend to arrive, but suddenly, he began to hear shouts and insults from outside. It was some thieves messing with one of the protagonist's friends. They accused the guy's girlfriend of stealing their monster core. I'll summarize for 2 because this doesn't lead us anywhere. The thieves got aggressive, but the protagonist intervened. Peter threatened them to leave, but it was useless. Then Tank and the security council arrived, so the guys had no choice but to leave the place. Later, they went to a restaurant far from the mall. So they had a good afternoon, and as the night came, they said goodbye. By the way, the protagonist didn't tell his friend anything about the God of War system. Now Peter could continue his journey. He was already in the City H. This was the military base that Jack talked about. The protagonist watched and analyzed everything to see how he could get in and find clues to free his father. However, he understood that trying to infiltrate alone was ridiculous. He risked dying without a percentage of victory. Peter explained that this city was hated by the military. He came from an area guarded by mercenaries and star families. So Peter, to find more information since he didn't know how to enter, after wandering around here for 10 days, decided to visit a friend who worked nearby. We'll call this lady Natalie. She told the protagonist that if he didn't find a group to hunt monsters, she had contacts to recommend him. The protagonist thought he was strong enough to find a group, but he wasn't here to hunt monsters. Suddenly, in the casual bar, an important announcement was made to all hunters in the city. A joint operation would be conducted as a tournament to see who the most capable hunters in the city were. The top 10 would have a chance to secure a position in the central military base of the city. This was the opportunity the protagonist had been waiting for. A chance to get into the military base. What happens in this story is that all these monsters are seen due to a meteor shower, which causes outbreaks of these creatures. So the three associations periodically join forces to eliminate monsters, and hunters are highly rewarded. Each monster has a certain point value in this tournament. The stronger and rarer the monster you eliminate, the more points you earn. The winners are the top 10 people with the most points. The winners receive the best rewards. All of this takes place in the wild or prohibited zone of this city, where it's the most dangerous. The protagonist thought about what I've just explained, and his goal is to be in the top 10 hunters this year. The next day it was time to sign up for the joint operation. Peter was looking at the contract that was a death contract, which is normal because in massive hunts, casualties are practically inevitable. Natalie was in the same place, and upon seeing Peter, she was concerned because he would also participate in this operation. So she asked this boy to take care of him. We'll call the boy Dan. He's the son of the leader of the mercenaries. At first he had no intention of helping the protagonist, but Natalie promised him that she would introduce him to a younger sister so that he would have a chance to win her over. Dan agrees because he's in need of female affection, but it's all a deception. Natalie didn't even have sisters, so the evening came, and a military train departed towards the mission. The protagonist and practically all the people who signed up were here. Peter thinks that the mountain monsters were of rank F, so the three major forces of this region gathered for this event. Exactly. We are on this mountain called Phantom Rain. This guy was the main leader of the star families that showed up, and we will call him Falcon Dan. He's like the leader of the mercenaries, and later I'll talk about the leader of the soldiers, which they don't mention and is not relevant. But remember, he's the leader on this mission. Actually, I'm just the representative. On the other hand, in a very refined place, the real leaders of the main forces were. On one side, the military chief, who we will call Connor. Also, of course, Dan's father, the chief of the mercenaries, whom we will call Holland. And finally, someone very despicable, one of those who turned their back on Jack. This old man, whom we will call Falcon. He was the leader of the star families. I really didn't do anything relevant. It's just three old men putting their representatives as the main candidates to win the competition. There you have it. Pelotas moved very quickly in the forest, thinking that this mission was like cutting two ropes in a single attempt. If we eliminate monsters, we would gain points to continue increasing our strength. And if he stayed in the top 10, he could start investigating the military base. Easy. It took 3 days in the last tournament. Peter investigated, and the lowest top 10 was above 500 points. So right now, he had to get at least 600 to have a chance to be among the top 10. Peter arrived at these ruins, at this abandoned village, and wondered why everything was so quiet and calm. But the monsters immediately started to come out. These were known as rainrock spiders. The protagonist says that these bugs are of rank F, they have poisonous teeth and live in hives. This abandoned village was a perfect nest for them, and it was an excellent opportunity for Peter to get an extraordinary amount of points using his sword and his speed. The protagonist looks like a tornado, sweeping away everything in his path. Peter got rid of all of them, thanks to his strength, but he knew that the spiders were very territorial. so it didn't make sense to keep looking around this area. However, the plan changed because he wasn't getting points for eliminating these weak bugs. However, this material was useful for him to sell and get richer. More spiders were coming, so Peter would eliminate them to continue polishing his movement technique. Willow steps. Just when he eliminates them, he understands that this movement ability was amazing. Although he didn't have great speed, the spiders really didn't have a chance to touch him. Here the protagonist clarifies where he got the stability from. He bought and learned it at the shopping center, and it was only rank F, but really, each ability is divided into 4 stages: beginner, partial, familiar, and perfection. The protagonist's pruning would hurry to clean up this nest of spiders and go to eliminate monsters of rank. If they earned points, not far from there, a pursuit was happening. Some assassins were chasing Adam. The boy was of intermediate rank, that's why he had the ability to escape. But right now, he was hurt because he was ambushed, and he wanted to. Incidentally, Dan ended up arriving at the abandoned village of the spiders. Without noticing, he was being sought by these monsters. But he was too relaxed and didn't even bring a weapon. He was just about to be bitten, but the protagonist appeared eliminating all the spiders. Peter wondered how a kid was in such a dangerous situation. And Dan, of course, recognized the boy that Natalie asked him to take care of. Both took refuge in a house in the village. Dan questioned how a rookie rank, in other words Peter, had come to this village alone. The protagonist tells Adam that he should stay here. The rescue team would arrive in a couple of hours, and this is the safest place. Dan tells him who he was, and that he couldn't call him Chubby. But Peter was new in this city. He really had no idea who he was facing. Dan knows he was being pursued by strong assassins, so he had to stay with the protagonist. Then he offers him some interesting abilities in exchange for being his bodyguard. The protagonist didn't believe Adam, since the kid was offering rank abilities, and things like that cost millions of dollars in the markets. So he tells him who he was, and the protagonist remembers the president's last name. Then he starts to believe him. Dan, to make sure, immediately transfers him the same ability that the protagonist had. But this time Rango takes the Willow steps. The protagonist sees that the system accepted the skill without any problem and immediately agrees to take Danzano out of this place and save him. In exchange for these skills, the deal was already done. Suddenly, they are attacked. The attack was aimed directly at Adam. However, the protagonist manages to protect him. They were the assassins looking for Adam. These guys were sent by Falco, as Dan was very young and terrifyingly strong for his age. The Falcon family wanted to take care of him, and there was no better opportunity. Dan tells Peter to apologize and now he would fight, giving the protagonist time to escape. Dan tells the assassins that he recognizes them, meaning it's not obvious that he's from the Lee family. Peter ponders, and the name Falcon sounds familiar. In the past, he was rescued and saved by Peter's father when he was a child, in court, on the same day that Jack was sentenced. He saw how that old man blamed and incriminated his father. This was also a matter for the protagonist, to destroy and end Falcon. They become one of the protagonist's new targets. The assassins begin to attack. The protagonist is ambushed from behind, but with all his strength and in a single blow he pushes the attacker back. Dan was being harassed, but Peter also gets rid of the other two. They think they are intermediate warriors and have equipment of faith rank. It wouldn't be easy, but eliminating them all wouldn't be impossible either. So Peter activates perception and moves using the Willow steps, a movement technique. The first assassin tries to hit the protagonist head-on. In fact, all three try to eliminate him, but they can't. The protagonist can't advance against all three of them either. So, he decides to retreat. Peter asks Adam if he can still move. Adam acts as bait, and the protagonist surprises one of the assailants, attacking him with the full power of his sword. However, he gets shot in the back, but it doesn't affect him too much. Dan tells him to take down one. That would be enough. Peter shouts that he can go now, but the system tells Peter that with the 10 unallocated points he has, he can learn the Willow Step skill of rank E, which Dan just gave him. Peter decides to learn it, and in less than 10 seconds, the skill is unlocked for the protagonist and he can use it. So in a quick move, Peter manages to incapacitate one assassin. Another tries to attack the protagonist from behind, but thanks to perception, Peter evades him and with a swift blow gets rid of the last remaining assassin. Dan can't believe what happened. Not only did they win, but the protagonist also learned a skill in a matter of seconds. Something impossible. The protagonist says that the guys were loaded with money. So, Taking the busy ball to the first place was because the one who sent these assassins was after that first position for the reward. Not far from there, they were hunting monsters. It was Falco, and he wondered why he lost contact with the assassins looking for Adam. However, he thinks that as long as Dan was injured by the trap, he wouldn't have a chance to compete for the first place. That was the only thing that mattered to him. Now, the protagonist carries Adam, looking for a safe place. At one point, they stop because they notice that it's too calm. Just at that moment, they are attacked by a rank E monster. However, the protagonist easily gets rid of it. With that, they obtain medical artifacts that sell very well in the market. But now they have to continue the journey. Dan explains to Peter why it's good to occupy the top positions and make the first place possible. There's something called artifacts that emit some super mysterious plants. In fact, it was something very recent in this world, but these elements are especially good at increasing the level of those who consume them. The higher the rank of the element, the more it helps you overcome your own powers. The protagonist says that for the first place, a minimum of 1,000 points is needed. Dan says there are too many rank E monsters, but he knows where to find them, and they head there. Upon arriving, the protagonist feels the domination of the monsters nearby, iron wolves, and they are of rank E. Peter thinks that all these creatures could increase 3 times faster in rank. Besides, he would get points to enter a good top in a special place for mercenaries. So the protagonist is eager to start the hunt. In a very short time, they earn 134 points, and now it's best to retreat from this place. Peter and Dan rest in a mini shelter they made. Dan says that now they would have over 1,000 points to redeem, but this wouldn't be enough for the first place. Dan said that the Lee family, or rather the Falcons, probably had several groups to earn points, which was illegal. But if they weren't discovered, then 1,000 points probably wouldn't be enough. It was already the second night of a 3-day period. The immediate protagonist felt something like a spider sense. Peter felt as if they were being watched or stalked, but Dan was focused on roasting the legs of the monsters they had hunted and killed. He found it extremely delicious, but suddenly a strong presence appeared. A rank E wolf. However, this was a king, probably the king of this whole pack. He said that unlike the others, it was on another level, on a different power level easily, and by far the strongest creature Peter had faced. Dan said that a monster like this equated to the power of a rank C. Rank C monsters were capable of confronting a warlord. Peter said that then it didn't make sense to fight, only to run. The monster started to chase them and was very fast. Peter noticed that this thing was twice as fast as a wolf. It would probably be the end for him if it caught them. The protagonist dodged it using his speed ability and tried to cut it, but it was futile. He didn't even have the strength to pierce this king's skin. The king charged at them with its body, and with no alternative, it exploded. He decided to level up his movement ability. That's how he managed to evade it. Peter was amazed by the power of this being. A single blow could be more than enough to kill. But Dan was already amazed at the speed the protagonist moved. Peter wanted to keep increasing his level, but the system told him that when he recently increased an ability, he couldn't improve it further for a while. So he decided to boost agility, but he had already reached the peak as a warrior. However, even if he couldn't confront it, Peter knew this was enough to have a chance to escape at least. The protagonist used his sword again, and with the new attributes, he could apply more force. Although he managed to injure it, the wolf immediately recovered, and if it were an inch closer, the protagonist would have been done for. So he realized that fighting right now would be a certain death. He distanced himself in the mountains from these monsters. Dan surprised him with a piece of meat to calm him down, so they both began to discuss Dan's unhealthy eating impulse. But suddenly some visitors arrived, more guys looking for trouble. Peter considered the possibility that Dan had a curse of bad luck. The guys wanted to rob them, but none of them were more than novice warriors, so it was easy for the guys to get rid of all these types without any complications. After robbing them, they left, now loaded with more points and decent loot. The guys continued to move forward and encountered a group of people who had also been robbed. But these looked worse for wear. Suddenly, in an instant, they were attacked from behind. Although they managed to defend themselves, Dan immediately recognized important members of the Lee family, better known as the Twin Snakes. The protagonist said, These advanced Star Warriors were stealing points, secondarily to give them to Falco in case I haven't told you. Listen well. The official points are counted at the end in a safe place on this whole mountain. So it actually doesn't matter how many monsters you eliminate yourself. What matters is how many monsters you can bring to be counted in that safe place. The protagonist was attacked again, but he evaded it thanks to the movement ability. Dan and he hid like mice. Peter knew this was really dangerous. One of the snakes attacked the protagonist, but he defended himself. Peter said that these guys were really powerful against Arpanids, and two advanced ones. The protagonist's life was at stake. Peter defended against one, and Dan protected his back. The protagonist kept receiving attacks from all sides, so he escaped to avoid dying in the assault. The snakes thought Peter was Dan's bodyguard, and claimed that the guy hit hard, but wouldn't hesitate too much. The protagonist was thinking about how to get out of this situation, so he remembered the importance of the rank D King Wolf. He could lead them to it. That monster would take care of them. So Peter told Dan his plan, and they started to move. Of course, the pair of snakes wouldn't let them escape, and that's how it was. So the guys, as they ran, defended themselves as best they could. Thanks to the movement ability, it was an advantage that allowed them to fight or flee as they pleased. The snakes said they had to get hold of them. This was the last night, and they had to return to Falco to deliver the points they had. The protagonist was already close and threw a jar with a liquid that served to attract the attention of the rank D King Wolf. The guys are upset, but they didn't know what it was. And now they wanted to make the protagonist disappear. The boys finally reached the mountain area. The snakes say that this place is perfect to corner and capture them. However, they were the ones cornered. Right in front of them, the King Wolf appears, and they recognize it immediately. They also understand that all of this was a trap. The wolf is facing them. Although they can withstand its attacks, the archers are useless because the arrows were off. They didn't even scratch the wolf, so the snakes order everyone to retreat. This was absolutely dangerous. Peter and Dan watch from afar, impressed that they didn't die just like that. But Dan tells the protagonist that the wolf didn't even flinch. It would easily keep them busy for a while. The wolf attacks with all its power. It wasn't planning to let itself be defeated easily. The guys wondered how this monster was so powerful. However, honestly, they were holding up well because they weren't facing just anything. Only the snakes could withstand its attacks. The King Wolf was already eliminating all the archers. The guys take out a super powerful rope, a weapon with good range, very good for trapping these creatures. So, taking advantage of the snake's distraction, the wolf is caught from its hind legs and they bring it down. Dan says that the ropes significantly reduce the difficulty of capturing these monsters. The snakes launch their combined attack to deal a great blow to the king. Peter says that this combined technique is comparable to a ranged technique, and Dan can't believe that the wolf was defeated by these kids. However, the wolf gets up and uses its magic horn to pierce the twins. So, Peter and Dan intervene, eliminating the few subjects left loose. The protagonist takes advantage of the fact that the wolf is injured and on the ground, so he attacks it with all his might using the activated penetration. Finally, he manages to defeat the monster. The twins manage to get up but fall to give their last words. They are furious for falling into the protagonist's trap and not erasing him from the moment they saw him. The protagonist thanks them for all the loot and for finally eliminating the wolf. The two guys fall and end up dying. Despite all its injuries, the wolf gets up and tries to escape. The protagonist tells Dan that they must chase it, as it's surely worth an overwhelming amount of points. The king wolf runs towards a cave. However, it can't hold on any longer and ends up dying once and for all. The system tells the protagonist that he eliminated a king wolf and has earned 5 points as a reward. The boys start collecting what they can. The wolf is also worth a fortune, but the most valuable thing is its horn. Something so valuable that, officially in the point system of this tournament, it doesn't even have a value, because it had never been captured. But they could easily sell it on the market for 10 million. In addition to the super useful rope from the twins. Dan says that the total points of the twins are over 300. So, they have victory assured. The boys look at the entrance of the cave. They decide to enter and investigate why the wolf wanted to go in there, hoping to find something great. When the protagonist enters, he sees what has happened. It looks like a great massacre among the monsters. The boys conclude that it was an internal fight. Probably when the animals turned into monsters, they had a conflict among themselves. Two boys start to check if they can collect more points, but there's a steep climb. Dan tells Peter that since he's injured, it doesn't make sense for him to climb, so Peter climbs alone. The protagonist climbs and is too surprised. Now he sees a mutated tree. He doesn't know how this whole area is possible, but suddenly foxes and eagles appear. The protagonist hides, and they think that if they are protecting this place, maybe there's something important and alien hidden around here. The new day arrives, and all the participants are here, handing in their points. Most of the hunters are already here, waiting their turn to count their points. This guy named Chan, he's the army representative, and near him is Falco, also waiting his turn to count the points. Peter and Dan finally manage to arrive. Now it's Chan's turn to count his points. Paco is upset because the twins still haven't appeared. Chan has 746 points, and Falco has an inferiority complex, saying he expected nothing less from his biggest rival. However, Franco is confident because he received help from several groups, and that would be enough to surpass him, reaching a total of 812 points. Falco shouts it at Chan, but he ignores him because he knows how useless Falco is. Now it's Dan's turn.